also give the start.
Yeah. Makes sense. I think we're good. Same here, yeah.
Just be at 12 o'clock, just opposite you. I'll be there next to the cameraman.
Okay. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Olaf Groth. I am a professor of practice at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, teaching technology and strategy courses. I'm also the CEO of advisory think tank Cambrian Futures. Welcome to this session, which is live streamed around the world. I want to explicitly welcome not just you all here in the room, but also our audience online, wherever they may be, to this very exciting discussion about a cutting edge, if not the most cutting edge conversation that is going on around the world right now on AI readiness amidst an AI revolution, a cognitive revolution, as it were. We have a very high caliber panel here assembled today, and let me just say a few reminders. This meeting is not subject to Chatham House rules because it is public, so you can quote and you can use what you hear for your own benefit and that of citizens around the world, hopefully. The other thing that I should say is that if you wish to tag or post this event, please tag the World Economic Forum at hashtag AMNC for annual meeting of the new champions 23, AMNC 23. That would help all of us spread the wisdom of the panel here today. Before I introduce the panel, let me just frame up the topic by saying that AI, and especially generative AI, has been touted to bring with it the potential for very, very significant economic development potential growth to the tune of some $16 trillion around the world over the next decade or so. Latest numbers on generative AI are something like 4.4 trillion likely added on top of the 16. Now, all of that, mind you, of course, is theory until we make it happen. So in order to make that theory happen, we have to build ecosystems. We have to create conditions that allow us to exercise the tremendous potential of this new foundational technology. Is there hype? Most definitely there is hype. That does not mean that this technology is not groundbreaking and won't change both our economies and our societies. So we are here today to discuss the potential for both the economy, but also, and most importantly, for humans, to put humans at the center of that development. So with all that said, let me just introduce our panel briefly. We have with us today Her Excellency Paula Ingabire, the Minister of Information, Communication Technology and Innovation of Rwanda. Welcome, Minister. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. We have Liu Jiren, who is the chairman of a very successful AI-driven company, Newsoft Corporation, which is a mature company employing AI here in China. I was told 40% penetration in Social Security, 30% penetration in hospital AI systems or digital systems. So a company that is already very successful spreading AI. We have also Darko Matovsky, who is a startup entrepreneur, very important part of our ecosystems, of course, Chief Executive Officer of Causa Lens, which makes AI explainable, as it were, very important for trust assurance. Trust assurance will be a key theme here, as that is the most important currency in what we have called the cognitive era. And then we have Joanna Bryson, my colleague at the Hertie School, not my colleague, but my peer at the Hertie School, where she's a professor of ethics and technology. She was also in the first batch of experts at the Global Partnership on AI, so has been exposed to the topic of development of AI that is ethical and trustworthy. So welcome all of you. Please let's hear a round of applause for our panel. Without further ado, I'd like to start the conversation with a round of opening statements, please, from each one of you. And I'm going to turn to Her Excellency, the Minister in Rwanda. And I'm going to ask you, Minister, what's the agenda of tech development in Rwanda, and what role does government play, as well as what's the interface between government and business and other stakeholders to make those new frontiers happen in your country?
Thank you very much, Olaf. Perhaps I should start by saying Rwanda sets itself to be a leading technology hub on the African continent. And to do that, our strategy is to be a proof of concept hub. And one would ask, what does that mean? Really, it's being a space where innovators, startups, big corporations can come and experiment with emerging technologies, test them, try them out, and if they're proven successful, then they're able to scale to the rest of the continent from Rwanda. And that has been a very deliberate strategy, because I think for a very long time, as we thought of our ambitions of being a leading tech hub, I think one thing stood out as a major challenge, which was always the size of our population, about 14 million population. And for many big companies, that felt like a too small a market to expand into. And so we figured if we're really going to nurture new innovations and technologies and really be at the forefront, we might as well position ourselves as a proof of concept hub, a market where really you don't need a big market to test new technologies. I think we've heard very much about Zipline and how it started off in Rwanda using the drone technology to deliver emergency health products, including starting with blood products. And so once that concept was proven successful, they've been able to expand in about 5 other markets. And so really that's our vision as a country. And very particularly as we talk about AI, I think, let me start off by saying the role of governments is to put in place a regulatory environment that enables innovation. Just about a month ago, we did put in place our national AI policy, which we put together with the support of the Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution in Rwanda, and obviously with the World Economic Forum. And for us, it was very critical that as we think about artificial intelligence, we're already, putting in place that enabling environment, both for business, regulations, and policies that is going to allow with the experimentation of AI solutions. And I know the other panelists will talk about, AI in healthcare. I think that's one particular area that we're looking at to see what healthcare solutions we can, AI-enabled healthcare solutions that can be deployed. We've already done, an economic analysis assessment to see what are those industries and segments where we feel like AI has the most potential to disrupt but also create impact. And so healthcare, agriculture, public service are the three top ones that we've already identified with very specific use cases that we will be implementing over the next 2 years to really look at what the potential of implementing these AI solutions will look like. And then maybe finally, your other part of the question, which was really around what is the the interface between government and businesses. I think, as I said, one, there's the bit where we put in place the enabling regulatory environment for innovation. Two, and what does that environment look like? It's really how do we enable access to capital, early stage financing for these startups and businesses that need to experiment with this. How do we create a market for those innovations, knowing that government is the biggest consumer of these technologies? I think with the hype, but also the fears and concerns around AI, to build trust, government needs to lead the way in implementing some of these AI-enabled solutions and creating that trust that is required within the population so that also the private sector can be able to do that. The other bit is really opening up data. I think data is really the heart of all these AI models that we are building, and government has lots of data available. So how do we clean up the data, structure it better, and how do we anonymize it so that we open it up for the industry so that they can really leverage it and create breakthrough innovations.
Thank you very much, Minister. You already said a number of the magic words here, of course, including the word trust. Because as you build an ecosystem in the country, you don't just want to enable entrepreneurs. That's key, of course, that's core. It's core to economic development. It's core to this AMNC here as well. But you also want to make sure that these innovations fall on fertile ground and that they do right by the people of Rwanda. And so coming to the topic of trust then, and of course, trust comes with understanding. It comes with understanding. It comes with a certain level of skill, of literacy, as it were, of not just basic digital tools, but also of artificial intelligence, what it does, how it does things, how you deal with data, data privacy, data agency, and things of that nature. And maybe we can come back around on this question. I'd like to next then go to Joanna on this to ask, this whole topic of trust. How do we look at that between business and government? Clearly, I don't think I'm saying anything new when I'm mentioning that we have not been doing really well on the trust front when it comes to big digital platforms, when it comes to data, when it comes to artificial intelligence. The prevailing feeling has been that we are objectifying too many people around the world. How do we fix that? How do we make sure that countries like Rwanda, China, any country around the world fosters AI readiness in a responsible way?
Well, thanks very much for the question. I just want to say quickly, as someone who is now a professor of ethics and technology, just to be clear about this, I also was a programmer for 5 years, and my PhD was in AI from MIT, working on transparency, so we actually have met before. So when I say this, I'm not saying it because I'm a technophobe or whatever. I really like the way you framed the question. A lot of people, especially the British, used to ask me, how can we make people trust AI? And that is the wrong question to ask. We need to be talking about the people who are building AI and the people who are regulating AI. So I love the question you actually asked, which is how do we make people feel secure about this? I think it's by making people secure. And we need to be thinking very much about the fact, are we worrying about wages? How are we helping the people who are displaced? When people have an unexpected life event, are they likely to be able to continue paying their rent or their mortgage? Right? So governments have an important role in helping us all deal with change because we're entering change whether or not with technology or without. Having said all that, I do think part of the reason that we have challenges with trust right now is because we know we're not getting the information we should, and we haven't had enough transparency. So I do think it's really important that we recognize that we're in the information age, that we find out a lot of things, a lot of interesting ways, and we do have to basically do things that benefit our people, or else the people will find out. And sometimes governments find out from unfortunate voting events. But you know, we need. I think that we should think of AI hopefully, and not only as something that empowers us and makes us all more productive and can help our economies, but also as helping us to be able to understand that the governments are doing things for us and that we can see the value. Do you know during the pandemic, populism actually dropped in every country except the US for some reason. But by and large, people could see that their governments were doing something and they hadn't sort of understood why pay taxes. And all of a sudden, oh, there's a big problem, the government is helping me. So I think that we need to think of the age of AI as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for knowledge and for apparency and for transparency, not only with the technology, but throughout culture.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you a follow-on question, because what we heard from the minister is, of course, that you need hubs for entrepreneurs. You need to enable entrepreneurs. That's where change happens in a society. That's where upgrading of a societal skill base happens, where the next tier comes to fruition of economic and social development. You need infrastructure for that. You also need to make sure, as you said, Minister, that you flow the benefits of that through healthcare systems, education systems. You mentioned a number of domains that really have public benefit. What I'm hearing from you, of course, Joanna, is also that as we do that, we have to make sure we keep the human at the center, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so how do you, what's the element here that we need to bring to fruition? Governance, is it, what do we do to make an entrepreneurial system like this not just successful economically, but trusted by the people?
Well, like I said, well, there's two problems, of course. One is opening a window in such a way that people can understand it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to open source everything or whatever, open source letting people see all your code. We can still have competitive secrets and advantages, but we need to at least know what there is to know and what you need to do to be able to find out about that. So, for example, in the EU, we've been talking a lot about audits, and some companies are very afraid of that. But you need to understand other industries, the vast majority of industry now is all digitizing, and they're not afraid of AI audits because they already do compliance. It's just the tech industry hasn't been used to compliance yet. So the fact that you will be audited and that you need to be able to yourself know how your code works. I mean, some AI companies have been very sloppy. Means that it shouldn't terrify you, and it does not mean all your competitors are going to come through the door and see what you're doing, and that you have to explain every detail, like every weight on the neural network. No, we audit banks without finding out how the synapses work in the heads of the people. The same way we will audit whether you actually followed good practice, best practice, just like any other industry, due diligence, best practice, whether your people did that when they trained the AI. Right? And if they use machine learning on their AI, then when they trained it, when they tested it, how are they ensuring quality? So that's the kind of thing that companies can do, and that now the EU looks very likely to be mandating that companies do, especially where AI takes decisions that affects people's lives, like welfare systems or banking or education or medicine.
So clearly, the point you're making is that in the cognitive era with AI, ethics and economics are tied by the hip. We have to co-think that. In order to enable good economic growth, you're going to have to enable ethical growth.
I said there were two things, and I forgot to say the second one. The second one is, of course, political polarization. Yeah. And if you can't keep if you have a bunch of the society that identifies as hating you, then they aren't going to trust you. So that is a separate question I don't think we're touching on here, but it is something that needs to be acknowledged.
We might come back around to that. I'd like to next go to Liu Jiren, who, as I said, leads Newsoft. And we mentioned that it takes all kinds of parts in an ecosystem. We need government enablement of infrastructure, of talent, of capital, you mentioned, of ethical safeguards in order to empower that growth. I think it would be a mistake to think of governance automatically as a limiting factor of growth. But Liu, you have lived this life, as it were, as a very successful business leader. And so I'd love to hear from you What does it take, from your perspective, in terms of business-government collaboration, ecosystem building, for you to be successful and to spread AI in a responsible and commercially successful way? And you mentioned to me as we were preparing that especially in healthcare, which is one of the big things that your company is focused on, orchestrating that ecosystem is really key, and there needs to be active orchestration. Over to you.
Okay. As a technology company, we very much like to talk AI because AI is a fashion. AI can create value. But if you're talking how to create a value to social development, how to convert those kind of technology to empower others in industry, I think is a big, very big challenge. The challenge is not technology only, it's an ecosystem. I just take the example about healthcare. If we're talking about a healthcare transformation, they adapt AI technology. Firstly, you meet a kind of a challenge about data. How to capture data, how to collect data, privacy, the governance, and also if you use that data to make a diagnostic, that is not like a ChatGPT. ChatGPT is okay, you can write an article right or not. But if you make a disease diagnostic, you must very precise. And no any other's choice should be at least same as doctor's level. So I think now the people talking about ChatGPT is booming, it's happy because it can draw the picture, you can write article, you can do anything. It's kind of entertainment. But if you're coming to healthcare, it's very serious. And you need to talking about who pay money for this AI, what is secure and safety, how to convert the knowledge of doctor become a digital clinical pathway. So, but if you look at the demand, it's a really huge demand, especially in China. China is a country we have a big population. The most important is the challenge of healthcare system is big city have first-class healthcare services. Second-tier city is second-tier the services. The countryside is another one. The gap, the quality of healthcare services is big. The big gap means the cost is different. Low quality of healthcare service means it costs more money. On the other hand, China become an aging population society. We already have 200 million population, more than 65 years old, and years old. So how to access the healthcare services equally? That is a big, big challenge. So that is a market we can apply the AI. So that is our practice. We make a cloud hospital. We connect all the hospital in city, a doctor, nurse, like him to deliver their services, come to home. At the same time, we digitalize all the clinical pathway from individual doctor to be digital platform. So we focus on each of the diseases. We use AI to create a kind of dedicated treatment of digital, the way to like a doctor in big city, a small city or countryside, they have the same kind of quality. So it's very, very hard because we need, as a company, we need to talk so many people. We talk with the government officer, we talk him, that's good for people, good for the city. Then we talk about with the hospital to say, hospital already make a big transformation from inside the hospital to be home. You're bad, not only in hospital, in outside of hospital. Then we need to wake up all the doctor is use a digital way, AI. So they take a very long time, very, very challenge. So that means today, maybe we need a good technology, but I think technology is much behind, much advanced than our ecosystems. The most of challenge to applying the technology is we are not ready. I mean, the ecosystem is not ready to use AI. Today, we can say every people use AI. It's for our daily life, for personal assistant. If we use vertical for industry, it still need cooperation cross industry or public and private sector have a more close cooperation.
I think it behooves us to point out that the point you're making, one of the points you're making is, look, this is not like ChatGPT going to 1 million users in 5 days. We're talking about sophisticated tools that have severe, hopefully positive impact on patients, but it might not if we don't orchestrate correctly. You're also saying that AI can help you leapfrog over missing medical infrastructure and health infrastructure in tier 2 cities and rural environments. That's a big if. So where is the government required here? What do they need to do to help you orchestrate that ecosystem? Because I'm sure there's only so much you yourself can do.
Yeah.
How do you get doctors to accept this and do this? How do you get locals? China is very digitized, of course, but I suspect you still need to have basic digital skills, infrastructure in order to make that leapfrogging work.
We become not only technology, we become a kind of an educator. We need to knock the door to government. We're talking with him what it means Cloud Hospital. Like him to know that is a perfect selection to the cities, and because it's a benefit to everybody in the city, especially for elderly person. They are very hard. The China single children, maybe not living together with a family, and also so many senior people living alone. So how to like him to come to hospital? We say Cloud Hospital is hospital at home. So government is happy for that program, and then we like him to call. China is good because most hospitals are owned by government. They like him to come to platform to say, you need to not only serve the people come to hospital, you need to serve people at home because they work together with the payer side because insurance is pay at home is much less cost than pay at a hospital. And then we digitalize all that kind of services, the clinical pathway. For example, the people stay 3 days in a hospital when surgery. After that, they may take 3 months for recovery at home. So they needed to occupy the bed in a hospital. So the hospital is very happy for those kind of turnover because they can improve their, their margin for their services. At the same time, this platform offers a big job opportunity. We use this technology in one of our province, in Zhejiang province. It's now already it's around 10 cities adapt our systems. Thousands, the nurse and doctor, they come to the home of a patient, and but we take a very long time. We must to talk, and first they don't believe, they reject. And the most important, no regulation. And the government is starting to make a regulation and how to use that data and how to like a payment and also some kind of standard for each of diseases. It's very, very detailed, so detailed, just like a build real hospital. But that is not existed in past. It's very, initiative.
So what I'm hearing then is that, yes, it starts with a government mandate because it's in the interest of public health, but it takes a very thoughtful, specific design. Government needs to work with the systems providers like yourself, but also with the doctors, because I'm sure doctors have something to say about, providing services at lower repayment fees, adding those services for rural patients on top of physical patients on location. The patients will have something to say. You have to make sure that they're digitally connected, but they also need physical infrastructure at home, et cetera. So it's an ecosystem orchestration problem. And I want to go now and take that to you, Darko. You at CausaLens are helping us understand better what AI can do. help doctors who are not maybe digitally native or AI native, help patients who may be even less so, understand what AI actually does. So I'd love for you to tell us exactly what that's about. And I also then want you to answer the question of, from an entrepreneur, startup entrepreneur's perspective, what parts of the ecosystem are particularly important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would start by saying first that 85% of AI projects never leave the lab. And there is a fundamental reason for that. The fundamental reason is that people don't actually trust the algorithms. The way it works is there is usually a bunch of data scientists, they throw a lot of data in a black box, and something comes out. And as you mentioned, it can be very entertaining if it's in the context of generative AI. And generative AI has lots of uses, and it's great. But when it comes to decision making, people really need to understand what the algorithm is doing. The AI must explain why I made this decision. It must be able to explain what it will do if a data point that it has never seen in the past comes to life. I mean, that's the real life. We have to have AI that guarantees outcomes even if we haven't seen a data point in the past. And that's why there is kind of a fundamental research in AI, and there's a lot of new technologies coming out that are able to explain why I make this decision, are able to explain their decision even beyond kind of historical data on which they're trained. So until we solve this problem of trust, we will have 85% of the project, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in government, whether it's in any industry, they'll just remain in the lab. Now, luckily, people like us and a bunch of other entrepreneurs, even large companies like Microsoft and Salesforce are working on emerging types of AI that can answer why. And so the technology, one of the technologies I want to mention is called causal AI, that is becoming a kind of go-to technology for explainable AI and trustworthy AI. And actually, the EU regulation explicitly mentions understanding cause and effect and understanding the why as a way to guarantee that these models can be deployed in the real world. And this is really, really important for decisions that impact well-being of humans, so kind of high-risk applications. In those instances, we really need to understand the why. We really need to understand why the AI made that decision. And we really need to understand that this AI will guarantee outcomes even if they haven't been seen in the historical data. Because the real world is, it's not, it throws a new data point that has never been seen in the past. So we've seen that with the pandemic, where a lot of models actually stopped working because it was a new environment that it was never seen before.
So clearly understanding is the first step to learning. Yeah. To influencing, to shaping, and AI readiness has to, of course, enable people to shape and to use in the right, hopefully responsible ways. How are you as an entrepreneur looking at government, though, to help facilitate that? Clearly, it's a foundational issue, a foundational thing that needs to happen. You as an innovator, as a small startup innovator, do you have time to deal with government, to deal with all kinds of stakeholders, to orchestrate them? What is your expectation?
Yeah, I think the European Union took a very, very direct and strong view on regulating artificial intelligence. They were first to the party, and they've just had a proposal for how AI should be regulated. I think there's a lot of good in that legislation. There's a nice tiering of what is high risk, critical, no risk at all, where it's not regulated. So things like chatbots and things we can have entertainment with are not regulated. And I think that's the right way forward. I think the EU has taken a really good approach to the problem. I think the reality, though, is that it's really, it sounds good on paper. The question is, how will it be implemented in the real world? You can have a regulation that is, has the best intentions, but if it's implemented incorrectly or enforced in the wrong way, it can hurt creativity, it can hurt these emerging technologies that are actually going to help us go from almost no projects in the real world to most projects in the real world. So I think that's where we would like to focus the attention, and I think it's about the implementation of those regulations, because I think all governments have a good kind of intention at the beginning, and it's the right thing to do to regulate such a powerful technology, but the implementation has to be in the right way.
Yeah, so protection good, but it needs to be appropriate, it needs to be practicable for the entrepreneur, otherwise innovation is already dead in the water, right? I want to throw the gates open on essentially two questions, and you pick if you like, right? So the first one is, we heard orchestration. Who is going to orchestrate? We of course default to government. Government is necessary. We also hear frequently government doesn't have the skills to orchestrate on advanced digital technologies. Not everybody is advanced as Rwanda or China on this matter, right? So that's number one. Number two is really, so on this matter of trust, where do we take this from here? How, for instance, do you institute trust in that ecosystem? What do you do to get doctors to play along? And we can answer that from all of our vantage points, right? Maybe the third provocation is, let's think international. Clearly, you have benefited from, and the international community has benefited from your experience, you have benefited from the international tie-ins, right? But it's easy to say this. It's a shining example, Rwanda is. But we also know that internationally, it's a bit of a mess. We're not seeing eye to eye on governance, on regulation, on how we innovate, right? So this international perspective, where do we take all that? Because, innovators like you and you, of course, Darko, need to scale out globally eventually, right, to make the business case work. So pick if you like. Maybe we'll start with you, Joanna.
Oh, that's great. I like it because I have so many things to choose between. Wow. I guess if you're talking about who is going to do the orchestration, so I don't know if you can tell from my accent. I grew up in America. I spent 20 years living in the UK, and now I'm living in Germany. And I've been working a lot with the EU on how to regulate. A lot of my I'm still American. A lot of people from America are terrified of EU regulation doing the wrong thing or somehow shutting them down. Or facilitating competitors globally by putting extra weight on only the good guys, and again, this is a problem you're seeing mostly in the digital sector because they were so underregulated for so long. They're relatively new, and people tend to be hands-off about new things. When I go to meetings where it's, like for example, the Euro chatbot, okay? You might think that sounds like a lot of AI companies, but it's mostly things like banks and healthcare systems that have to have natural language interfaces. Those guys say, oh, I spend 2 weeks a year on compliance. It actually helps me. The EU tends to steer me to looking at things that help my company. And then I spent half a day on the digital compliance. It's nothing. What is it with these digital companies? They're a bunch of whiners, right? So that's what I'm hearing from other sectors that aren't digital or aren't purely digital. So I think it's important to realize that the sectors themselves are a lot of the people that are helping with this orchestration. Normally what they do is they bring their concerns to the government and say, help us coordinate. We need a national strategy. In the EU, we also have this coordinated strategy so that we can talk to really large tech companies. And I think that's the other problem. At this point, we have a number of resources that we're using almost worldwide, and some regions have their own. But email systems, social media systems, they're really transnational, and they have a lot of power, and we've been allowing them to do a lot of the orchestration, and they have not been transparent. They haven't even worried about things about like where is their data stored and things like that. So I think we can't, first of all, when something is so important that other companies depend on it and ordinary people depend on it, we normally call that a utility. And that requires extra regulation. We have to say, yes, you're a natural monopoly, therefore we have to help you set a price that's fair. And we have to work more. That's now we as the people ask our governments to help make sure those companies behave in a fair way. The thing is that they're transnational. So I actually think we need innovation at sort of the WEF level, at the UNESCO level, to think about how do we regulate these new utilities that we're seeing that are transnational utilities. And I think that's one of the things we're going to need for orchestration. So we need bottom up and top down both, I guess.
Right, but that's regulation. That's not necessarily orchestration, right? The orchestration of ecosystems.
Well, okay, well, like I said the sector itself is doing some orchestrating. So they aren't regulating. The government, they asked to regulate, right? So there is orchestration coming not only from sectors, also from civil society do a lot of orchestration. So it's a bad metaphor in a way because there's not only one symphony. We need diversity. We have to have all these things moving around. But orchestration is being done. You just need to be coordinated and to cooperate with your peers. That was one thing I very much liked in Lee's. We need teamwork, we need team cooperation, and that's what the EU is doing really well. That's so that we can empower even very small countries. But we can also do that through other mechanisms like UNESCO, like WEF.
Thank you.
And maybe just to jump in here, I think when you talk about orchestration, obviously I think it's natural for everyone to think governments should take a lead, and I agree with that, especially in the beginning of, building an ecosystem effort around new technologies and new industries. What's very important to really underscore here is that government alone cannot do it on themselves. So you need that kind of partnership and collaboration that Bryson is talking about, and figuring out who plays a stronger role at what levels of this industry and technology maturing. Because yes, well, government will always be in the driver's seat at the very beginning, but as the industry matures, as the technologies become more embraced and adopted, then you see more of the private sector, taking a leading role. So I think it's just figuring out how you do it. When I did share the example of Zipline, I remember when they came, what we knew as a country was that we had so many challenges to solve for, especially starting even with healthcare. So what Zipline did was to present to us, we have drones that we can use for logistical services. Our problem was we need to deliver medical products, especially blood products, to healthcare facilities across the country where the road infrastructure is probably non-existent, where it takes more than 3 hours to deliver some of these emergency products, where it will require huge investments in terms of cold room infrastructure to store some of these products, vaccines, blood, and all of that. And so we said, we have a problem. We seem to have a solution. We don't have regulations. And I think what's important to know is that not everything has to be regulated. And as governments, we cannot regulate what we don't know. And in the technology space, what we tend to see also is that sometimes the innovations, the technologies are way advanced than the kind of policies and regulations that we may, already have in place. And so we had to choose the path of let's experiment with this solution, knowing that we don't have any regulation or policy. Let's build the regulations and policies that will enable an industry, a drone industry that will then look at other different use cases. I know Liu talked about some of the healthcare solutions, and I wanted to share one that we've had where we worked with Babylon to put in place an AI chatbot. What was very interesting, and we talk about trust, we had people, the patients, how comfortable are they? Not going to see a doctor in person, but really, calling through and, using the AI chatbot to have a diagnosis and trust that diagnosis without really seeking a second opinion. That was one. I think what was obvious for us was that people really needed to do it, but also not everyone. So the, middle class and above, everyone is comfortable. I don't want to show up at a hospital. If I can call in, if I can use the chatbot, I'm happy not to show up at the hospital. But for others, they're like, am I really sure I'm getting the right diagnosis? I really need to see, a health practitioner in person. Then we needed to put in place incentives for the health workers as well, because this is now an added piece of work, because if they're able to see 20 people a day, and now you're introducing the AI chatbot, so this means they're going to be 40 consultations, maybe double the consultations that they could possibly make. So what incentives do we put in place? Because now the workload has increased, but you also want them to be motivated enough so that they're paying the same attention as an in-person consultation. And then the third category, of course, was government when Babylon came, because we had concerns ourselves as well, to the extent that we're saying, okay, fine, we're comfortable with using an AI chatbot for anyone 18 years and above. What happens to kids? Am I comfortable, a 10-year-old, using the AI chatbot and trying to seek healthcare services? what measures do we put in place? Must they have like a guardian or someone in place? So these were all the kind of concerns that we had, but we knew very much that they shouldn't be concerns that limit us from testing that particular innovation and solution, but rather figuring out what could be everyone's concern and how do we really rally everyone around it, test it. We started with a pilot. We love pilots in Rwanda because that helps us to really, establish that are our concerns real, and could there be other risks that we're not looking at that are probably going to manifest when we start to implement some of these things. And I think that is what really also then eventually allowed us to be able to do a scaled deployment across the country where we're able to use this AI chatbot. So I think in a nutshell, that's it. And one last point that I want to make, and I think for the innovators, the business people here will agree with me, I think the bigger challenge we have as policymakers, but also as an ecosystem, bringing in question the issue of governance and regulation, is how do we streamline this? Because if he's in any European country and is thinking to go to Africa or anywhere else, and he has to navigate 10 sets of regulations. First of all, if you're talking about a highly sensitive industry like healthcare and financial services where there's sensitive data and there's all these risks around it, it's going to take him almost a year every time he expands into a new market. So how do we allow for, beyond the national ecosystem, how do we create that international ecosystem that allows us to really unlock these regulations at an international level where we streamline and harmonize? Because if they have to go to every new market and go through a year of figuring out how to comply and how to meet the requirements that are required, then scale is probably never going to be possible.
There's a key point here, right? And that is learning by sandbox, right? Learning by experimentation space. And I want to get the two entrepreneurial leaders here to comment on this. But before I do, let me just remind the audience that we're about to go to Q&A. If you have any questions, I believe our WEF team is going to manage that. So feel encouraged to flag them. Both of you heard this notion of experimentation spaces, right? Because frankly, there are so many things we just don't know yet. I heard you say don't over-regulate too quickly in ways that are going to stifle my business, but I also heard you being very responsible. That's the essence of your business, right? So how does that tension, that creative tension, work out, right? I heard Lou talk about the orchestration of these ecosystems, right, which probably goes a bit beyond what your company does as much as you educate. So what's your reaction here on especially this point of these experimentation spaces, sandboxes, across borders? Would that work for you? What would be a wish list? What would you want to see?
Firstly, I want to say, talking about trust, talking about cross boundary, but basically, we need to talking about trust. For healthcare, they don't trust the IT company. I don't think the people find out to make a diagnostic. They trust the hospital. Secondly, they trust the regulator. So, for example, we have a kind of software for stroke diagnostic. When the people got a stroke, they have a very limited time window. In some hours, they cannot move from a small country to the big city, the small town to a big city. People will have big trouble. So, they must use very limited time to make a diagnostic, make a surgery and something. So we did is we cooperate with the best hospital in Beijing, number one. All that other hospitals trust them, not trust us. We digitalize their clinical pathway. Firstly, scanning the imaging, and then they follow the steps of that and to say what is the next. And some other hospitals just follow up their the clinical pathway. So then there's a big hospital connect few hundreds county level second-tier hospital. They connect together. They're sharing about data. Like a big doctor can talk with a small doctor. So they build a kind of community. That's one. Secondly, those kind of software is very much serious. Because this is the life of people. If you make a wrong way, the people will be died and in big trouble. We must be pass a kind of check or verification from the government, like FDA, China called SFDA, we must got a kind of a certification, that is a ticket. So that means after the check of that, that software is just like a digital doctor. So see that the basically the level is the same as a high-level doctor, but much better than the normal doctor. So the two parties very important. Yeah.
I'm hearing three things. Maybe you could comment last, but I'm hearing essentially in each one of these sandboxes, experimentation and learning spaces, we need something of the nature of a kingpin for trust, somebody who is inherently trusted, and flow our innovation through them because they already have credit with the people, right? Second was we need connectivity and network effects in that kind of experimentation space so you can more readily have that orchestration and that scale out. And lastly, we need checks and improvement and iteration, right? Some kind of roadmap on that kind of checking and iteration improvement in that kind of sandbox. Darko, final comments on all that.
Yeah, I think individuals trust experts. So if I'm a patient, I trust the doctor more than I trust the government or the regulation. If I'm a business decision maker, I may trust my domain expert, my analyst to help me. So I think the key to get AI to be trustworthy is to have the expert of the system directly feed their knowledge into the AI algorithm. And this has not been possible in the past because we've just relied on historical data stored in some database. We've completely neglected the intellect of the experts. And I think we are very, very excited about the latest developments in AI with technologies like causal AI, which are able to essentially download the experts' knowledge into the AI algorithm. And then we have the best of both worlds. We have the best of data, we have best of human, and then we have trust in the AI because we know the doctor has put their knowledge in. We know that the engineer has put their knowledge in. And I think that is the key to trust in artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and I suppose the aspect of localization in this, it can be,
well, yeah.
I don't know the situation in Rwanda, but having an American doctor weigh in on a situation in Rwanda probably would be a misallocation of his expertise.
Perhaps, yeah.
Or their expertise, right? You want local doctors that know the local health environment,
That's
right? Yeah, Joanna.
I'm just a little concerned about the portrayal, so I hope you don't mind if I combat a little bit some of this. I mean, we were involved very much with, actually I have a master's degree in expert systems from 1991, yes, that matters, but realize that, and I love the grounding, the idea of the partnership with someone you know, right? So someone that you know that their reputation, but it's not just about, being sure that there's a system that you've been convinced has come from some particular expert. You need to think about cybersecurity, for example. So even if in all good, your system worked perfectly in the beginning, what if someone hacked into it? Right? There are standards that we have to put in place, and I think a lot of people do trust their governments. It varies by country a lot. So some countries have their governments establish trust, and then sometimes that varies over time too. But I really think we don't want to say that it's only that we're going to magically be able to get from one person to one AI system. Remember that there's always a whole ecosystem, and it all needs to be managed.
Of course, I actually don't disagree with you on that. I think that makes a complete sense at a kind of a higher level. I was just speaking at a lower level where if it's a healthcare AI, having reassurance that a bunch of doctors have put their knowledge into the algorithm is really, really important for trust. But of course, I think at a higher level, as you build out the systems, those concerns, yeah.
So it's essentially expertise and governance going hand in hand,
That's
right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're having to go to Q&A now, delightfully so. Any questions? And if so, please, your name and organization.
Sure, hi. My name is Amit Kakar. I actually am an MD in oncology and nuclear medicine. Work with Novo Holdings, and we are active investors in AI-based healthcare, life sciences, and sustainability companies. I sit on the board of Cure.ai, which is actually working in Rwanda right now, and also Accenture, which is one of the AI-based drug discovery company. I think my question is very fundamental, and that's data. If you look, whatever you guys need to generate today to have more resilient systems, you need data. And unfortunately, every country is going into a data silo today. Patient data is not being shared evenly across the world today. And it's not just one country, it's pretty much everyone. How do you make your system more robust? How do I have 1 billion scans on an X-ray or a CT to make sure that I have a higher sensitivity and specificity when I diagnose a stroke, a tuberculosis, or lung cancer? How do you achieve that in today's world?
It's a great question. Data is the fuel. How do we get it and safeguard it? Joanna, do you want to take this, and we'll go around the circle?
Yeah, sure. I just very quickly, so everybody's worried about the data privacy, as they should be. It is part of the role of a government to defend its citizens. And so citizens we know now that citizens can be manipulated, right? So data is a part of your person. We need to be able to defend that. However, having said that, there's lots of technologies now in place for even just here yesterday, people were talking about doing machine learning on encrypted data, right? Also, it's important to understand that if there's something that's very regular, so if you do actually have, there's 8 billion people with lungs, you can often learn quite a lot about lungs from a relatively small number of people who have consented, volunteered, who have volunteered and consented. And you don't need necessarily to have every person at every point.
I think I completely agree with that. I think technologies like homomorphic encryption allow you to learn from data you haven't seen, which sounds like a bit magical, but it's actually quite possible to do. So I think emerging technologies here are probably going to come to the rescue, but it takes time for those to scale before we can apply them.
Right.
And maybe I should share what we're doing in that sense. One of the things that we did about 3 years ago was put in place a healthcare digitization roadmap. And what we're looking at, and this was before we even put in place the data protection and privacy law. And by the way, it was a very exciting exercise when we were doing the data protection and privacy law, because we had to figure out what would be the right balance between not stifling innovation by being very protective, versus how do you enable innovation, but at the same time, as government, we need to make sure that the privacy and the protection of this personal data is really, taken seriously. And what we did, I do agree with you. I think what you tend to see is across different healthcare providers, everyone has their own data. It's siloed, as you said, but also it's very unstructured. Then the accuracy of that data is also in question. And so 2 things were very key in our health digitization roadmap. One was how do we enable for the Rwandan population a single electronic medical record. So what that means, it requires that we harmonize across all healthcare practitioners. So I have one record, so regardless of how many health practitioners I'll go and see, I still have one medical record that I can enable for anyone to see, but also ensure that I have all this information stored in one place. The second thing was to put in place a health exchange information platform, which would allow then for all these siloed hospital management systems and data sets that are in place to ensure that then you're able to exchange that data across the board. And then finally, I think with our data protection and privacy law, as a citizen, you have agency. You're the custodian of your data. You then decide who looks at your data, who sees it, and who you get to share that with. And I think it's going to be some, at least 3 years in work to sort of get us to the point where we will have one medical record per citizen, per patient, and then enabling that consent that the citizen has over their data. And I think within the next 2 to 3 years, we should start to see the ability to then now, how do we anonymize this data and open it up to players such as yourself, the private sector, so that they can innovate around that data.
Because clearly, and I think we all agree, without data, there is no innovation and there is no advancement on the human condition. We have to step away from data being a dirty word, and we also have to protect that data, privacy assured, agency assured, before it changes hands. And sometimes we might arrive at models where the ones that we heard yesterday, where you might not actually need to exchange data because you can send algorithms there, even encrypted data can now be read. Very important topic. The global data economy, incidentally, forecast at about $6 trillion annually. So it's a huge opportunity for human growth if we ethics assure it. Any other questions here? Let's see, who else? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Sean. I'm a founder of College.com, which is a platform that we help students to use AI to create their own study plan. And we're just confronting the same trust problem as Mr. Liu just mentioned. A quick question for Mr. Liu. Do you think the trust problem is just a time problem, or it cannot be solved through time? I mean, when internet was just born, a lot of people don't trust internet at the very beginning, but have been already very used to everything through internet. What do you think about AI? Thank you.
I think that is just a timing problem. Even we face many kind of challenge, but AI can really help the social development. It's true. If we look at, they can help us to very much improve efficiency of our works, and sometimes, like I mentioned about doctor, the doctor is very much individuals. So if we use AI, it's very low level requirement. It's not like best doctor become more excellent. We like a low level, not low level doctor. It's not a good, good experienced doctor, 10% better than before. That is a great contribution to the cost of healthcare, and the people got more happy for that. So AI have so many applications. Even today, personal assistant already help us solve that problem. This timing will solve a lot of problems like data privacy. I'm so happy to say, if you come each of country, developing country or developed country, every country already starting to make their data privacy, governance and something. Everything they already start, not only today, it's already a few years ago. So that means it's just like, when the technology move ahead, and then the regulation will come in maybe a little bit later. But we need to give enough space, like technology, like us, like a technology, the innovator, give us a little bit of space, like us, to find something that never had before. So I think every people should be happy for this kind of very powerful digital world, computing power, connectivity, and also the data. It's a time data is very low cost. So that is a good time for us.
I might want to augment that. Maybe, Joanna, you want to pick up on this, but the element of time, of course, there's optimism baked into your answer here, Liu, of course, as an innovator, that we will figure this out as time goes on. But I think we can also agree that if we let this slide for too long, we accumulate more what we've started to call tech debt, which means too much data out there, too much violation, people stop trusting, then government comes in with an overly heavy hand. So clearly, as time passes, we have to be thoughtful about how we design these systems. And that is maybe how AI is different from other revolutions beforehand.
Well, I again want to say that, sort of defend, how good a government is something that the people of the nation and the government itself helps determine. So it isn't necessarily that eventually the government comes in with too heavy of a hand after having been too libertarian for too long. Sometimes they've already lost control and they can't come in and they don't know what to do, and some other nation winds up doing the regulation, or some other group of nations. So I think we've seen these kind of dynamics. But we can also have these ideal situations like what we're hearing with Rwanda, where they're working with the international. It's not easy. It's not easy dealing with some of these big companies come in. Some of them have really exploited and taken advantage of developing nations, locking them into 30-year contracts that were disadvantageous. So terrible, terrible things have happened. But some countries are doing a good job of threading that needle, of working with large tech, working with, supporting their infrastructure. And really, people talk about knowing I know even going between different states of the US that some states have good senators that are responsive and some states have senators that people can't talk to, right? So you realize that one of the things we need to do, what we need in a good world, or to get things working, is to be in control, enough control of our government that we can trust it. And then recognize that when you have problems, sometimes you have to move and work in these other institutions. But it's in everybody's interest to work collaboratively.
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, everybody. I now have the thankless task of trying to summarize this very exciting conversation, which is so multifaceted. I think there's just maybe a couple of very high-level takeaways, and then we'll summarize this in writing for you all afterwards. Clearly, government is here to stay, and it should be here to stay as the guarantor of doing right by people. That means economic prosperity, it means social justice, it means human dignity, right? So government is here. Government needs to be brought into development, and we also have to recognize government alone can't do this. It lacks the expertise. Government knows it lacks the expertise. Therefore, tighter collaboration within these experimentation spaces, and I think that is sort of the key takeaway here, that readiness is essentially about experimenting with what that actually means in a thoughtfully designed way, right? So as part of that, we need to have the trusted entities, we need to have the network effects, we need to have the cross-border, and we need to have the trust assurance. None of that can happen without government, but government itself is not going to do the trick. Just like we've seen corporates and startups themselves can't do the trick, it's about that tight integration. So these parts that we normally perceive as readiness, which means infrastructure and education and training and skilling, and data pools, et cetera, they're all critical ingredients, but they're nothing without a thoughtful design. And we don't have all the answers now. We need to experiment ourselves into those hand in hand to do right by our societies. So with that, let me please thank our esteemed panels here. That was a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much. And of course, our audience, thank you, and we will see you again here soon.